Trump was not arrested on Tuesday, as he had predicted, or on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. The entire week turned into a cable news melodrama, a giant guessing game, a sea of speculation. Stay tuned. It could happen soon, any moment now. The grand jury is meeting today. Nope, the grand jury was canceled, but it could happen tomorrow. It'll be historic, folks, once it actually happens. But Trump has now dominated the news for a week, based on his forecast last weekend, and whether the commentary is good or bad, that sucks up all the media oxygen, leaving his rivals sputtering. It's quite possible the Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg will bring an indictment against the former president in the Stormy Daniels case. Could even be tomorrow. We just don't know. But tune in anyway. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. There may be no indictment yet, but there's a furious media debate about the case, the porn star, Trump's handling of the probe, and whether this helps or hurts him. But growing criticism from much of the media as Trump has used vitriolic language and linked to a photo with a baseball bat.
The new weapon being used by out-of-control, unhinged Democrats to cheat on election is criminally investigating a candidate.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage in New York, Will Cain, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. And in Los Angeles, Leslie Marshall, the radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Will, despite the round-the-clock coverage of what would still be the indictment of a former president, if it happens, the Stormy Daniels case seems to be helping Donald Trump, at least in the short term. Why is that?
Because there's nothing to the case, because it exposes the politicized nature of the justice system in the United States of America. To listen to that hyperbolic language from so many, including those, I guess, most notably on MSNBC, this is an issue over projection versus reality, style versus substance, Howard. While President Trump's style can be criticized, the real substance and why it's playing in his favor is there's nothing to this case. You know, it's really not about a porn star. It's not about hush money. It's not about anything except potentially, allegedly, the misbooking of some fees paid out, which is a misdemeanor, which the statute of limitations has run on. And so if the the Manhattan DA chooses to pursue this case, it's nakedly partisan and political. It's nakedly a witch hunt to take down a political candidate, and that turns off not just Republicans, Howard. You heard from the former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who said there's nothing to this. This is political. And that plays in the favor of Donald Trump.
Leslie, even many journalists and even some of those on the left who don't love Donald Trump, including we saw a clip from CNN's Van Jones, say this is the least important of the various Trump investigations, that Alvin Bragg is, in fact, trying to turn a record-keeping misdemeanor into a felony charge. And most people don't care about this, and it was a long time ago. So is that part of why is boosting Trump, who's, by the way, raised about $2 million off this?
No, and Van Jones, I would argue, loves Trump. Look, this is helping Donald Trump for the same reason that covering all of his rallies helped Donald Trump. I mean, if you are the headline news, I think it was back in 1976, Howard Cosell said he was the most loved and hated man in America, but everyone knew his name because he was the most loved and hated. So Donald Trump has the headline, right? So whether it's an indictment or whether it's a rally, it actually does help the president, because the former president, because it stokes up his base, right? And it gets people out there, and he's saying, look, he loves to play the victim. And then when you keep having, it's going to happen tomorrow, and it doesn't happen, well, people say, look, this is a witch hunt. So I think it does benefit him, actually.
Right. Howard Cosell, hadn't heard that name in a while. I want to put up the first full screen, and this is for you, Will. Here is Donald Trump on his Truth Social site talking about Alvin Bragg. He is a Soros-backed animal who just doesn't care about right or wrong. This is the Gestapo. This is Russia and China. In another posting, he called Bragg human scum. Does that language trouble you, and why is most of the press shied away from dealing with it?
Look, it would not. When you say does it trouble me, it would not be my style. I don't call someone scum. I don't call someone an animal. Comparing what's happening in our justice system to what has happened in Soviet Russia may be hyperbolic, but it's not off base. I mean, it's an extreme example to show the direction of the United States of America if this is a path that we pursue. That's a pretty sober analysis, actually, Howard, and it's not just found from the likes of me. You could hear that from, as you pointed out previously, you could hear that across the political aisle, and you could hear that across the illegal analyst spectrum, that if you turn the justice system into a weapon, as Tucker said, we're lost. I mean, it cannot be a partisan tool. But so much about Donald Trump is a reaction to the reaction. It always is. Because we like to talk about Trump and we like to talk about style. We don't want to talk about substance.
You know, the other cable networks love talking about Trump. They love that he's back on center stage because their ratings have been anemic, and Trump as a story, no matter what you say about him. And let me put up is always helpful for getting people to tune in. Let me put up the other full screen for you, Leslie. And I think the tipping point in media criticism came with this, where it suddenly started to be talked about on TV. Why would Bragg act when it is known by all that no crime has been committed, and also known that potential death and destruction in such a false charge could be catastrophic for our country? And went on to call the Manhattan DA a degenerate psychopath. So many in the media are saying this is Trump threatening violence. Is that fair?
I do think it's fair. I mean, I want to go back for a second. Gestapo offends me, having relatives died in the Holocaust. This is not Gestapo people knocking on your door, not even knocking, breaking it down, dragging you off, putting you in trains, sending you to camps where you were murdered because of your religion or your sexual orientation. The list goes on. But as far as threatening violence, yes. I mean, this is way beyond the First Amendment. This is even way beyond yelling fire in a crowded theater. You know, I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when someone gets hurt or killed as a result of this type of rhetoric. This is very dangerous for anybody, especially a former president who's running again as president. And it really bothers me that not more Republicans are coming out. I understand they want to win, but at what cost do we win? I would hope that my fellow Democrats would call out people speaking like this on my side of the aisle as well. What are we teaching our children with this kind of rhetoric? What are we doing? Not only is the Republican Party doing to themselves and their party, what are we doing to our nation with this type of rhetoric? And, you know, this is not a game. This is a reality. There is a crime. And by the way, grand juries aren't political. They're comprised of people who have various political ideology. And if grand juries decide that there should be indictments coming down, then you can't just say this is politics. Is it politics in Georgia? Is it politics in Washington as well? Everything against Donald Trump is political by the left?
Well, first of all, we don't know the outcome of the grand jury, but it'd be absurd to assume that 12 or however many people in the grand jury in New York City don't have political beliefs. The district attorney is clearly political. It's a politically held office. He was voted upon democratically. Listen, what Donald Trump had to say is not a direct incitement to violence, which is the limits of the freedom of speech, which is the legal limits of the First Amendment. We've played this game over and over with the left drawing these absurd, extreme conclusions about Donald Trump's rhetoric. You can say, hey, I wouldn't choose, I don't think it's a proper use of the podium without saying we have now crossed the Rubicon when it comes to free speech and incited violence. To me, the reaction isn't as important as the actual substance. If you use the justice system to go after your political appointees, that is more impactful and more determinative of the United States of America than a tweet or a truth post.
Leslie, the New York Times informed us the other day, and this was picked up everywhere. I mean, nobody could resist the story, that Donald Trump had told friends that he wants a perp walk, that he likes the idea of being paraded before the cameras. He thinks that helps him. He's going to campaign on this. What do you make of that story? I'm sure that they talk to people who talk to Trump, in light of the fact that now Trump is rather vociferously insisting that he not be indicted, although he did take down, I should mention, the baseball bat post, which I think was just awful.
I would agree with you that that was awful and right that they took it down. Listen, Donald Trump has in the past talked out of both sides of his mouth, said something on Monday and something different on Tuesday. So I'm not really surprised at this. I totally believe what the New York Times said, and not because the New York Times is saying it. I believe it because that just fits the pattern of behavior and the character of the former president. You know, I mean, really, if it benefits him, and it certainly would benefit him, you know, to have that walk. And this is, he's fanning the flames here, right? He's saying, look, this is political again. You know, he is the victim here. And at the end of the day, even if somebody wants to, you know, claim this is just for political gain, is every single potential indictment against this former president for political gain? When we look at Georgia, when we look at an independent special counsel in Washington, D.C., that's one thing people have to ask.
Well, at least
but I
those
have
are.
to say, Howard, I think
At least those are weighty
at the end of the
matters.
day, this is going to hurt. This is going to hurt the Republican Party. Let me tell you why very briefly, okay?
I'm
Because
almost out of
if
time.
Donald Trump gets the nomination, he's going to lose. And if Donald Trump doesn't, he's going to say that the nomination was stolen from him, and it's going to be a circus, and I'll get popcorn to watch it.
I listened to a whole lot of people say he was going to lose in 2016, right up to the day that he didn't lose. The press largely sides with prosecutors and judges who rule against Trump when he attacks them. We've seen that going back to Bob Mueller, et cetera. But my view is that all of the coverage, good or bad, great or horrible, actually helps him because it blocks out everything else. It makes everybody else off the screen.
It did that to Ron. I think it did that this week to Ron DeSantis.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah, really quickly, to Leslie's question, is it all political? I mean, I think the answer is yes. And I again, I will reference the former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and ask the following: is it a coincidence that all of these cases are coming at the same time? Look, you can't say that Donald Trump saying "martyr me" is political when it's the attack on him that is political. It's like saying that William Barrett Travis at the Alamo drawing a line in the sand is invoking the attack of Santa Anna and the Mexican army. At some point you go, well, look, if you're going to attack, come on, bring it on, martyr me. But really quickly, Howard, I do think it will help a primary. I don't know if it will help a general.
Right. Well, Cuomo may identify because he thinks that he was unfairly pushed out of office. Meanwhile, Trump's lawyer in the DOJ documents case has testified, and Mark Meadows and other ex-aides will have been ordered to testify. We'll see what happens there. Most Republicans have rallied behind Donald Trump in the days since he announced he was going to be arrested in the Stormy Daniels case. But when pressed by journalists, they've tried to play down the Trump drama.
So it's not here that we're coming to defend President Trump. What we're coming to defend is equal justice in America. No, we're not talking about this in our conference. You're just asking about it. So it only dominates your asking.
Well, I think Republicans have every right to defend Donald Trump, every right to criticize Alvin Bragg. But how do you then turn around and say, like, oh, this is just a media obsession?
Well, I actually love what Kevin McCarthy had to say, Howard, about the dominance. I mean, he said, look, we're not dominated. We're not talking about this in our conference. We're talking about it because your questions are dominated by Donald Trump. And that harkens back to our last segment.
Yes.
I mean, look, you know, Howard, I truly love doing your show. I like doing it with Leslie, and I like self-awareness. We're 15 minutes into talking about Donald Trump. We all talk about Donald Trump. We all talk about Donald Trump. And I think that the House Republican Conference should say, how much federal money is going to, I don't know, to the Manhattan District Attorney? Because if it's being used for political purposes, let's make sure that shouldn't be the case.
Leslie, it has been dominating the news much too much, and so that's one. I mean, we'll get to other things later in the program, but
I know you will.
Republicans, so Leslie, Republicans, not surprisingly, are backing the former president, and they think that that's to their political advantage, at least for now. But one thing I wanted to say from the last segment was, if I was being indicted, I want to go in the back door, and that may well end up being happening if, in fact, Bragg brings this case. Go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, but you and I aren't Donald Trump. We don't have that personality. I would want to go through the back door as well. Will, I have to say, though, Will, you just proved that Kevin McCarthy was wrong. If, in fact, they're talking about funding or not having funding go to the DA,
well,
because then they would be
dominates.
talking about then they would be talking about Donald Trump. I totally disagree with you on that. I think Donald Trump is certainly a part of the conversation that the Republican Party is having, and I'll tell you why to answer your question, Howie. This is the situation that Republicans find themselves in. There are people out there, and we saw it with Speaker McCarthy, right? We saw when he finally got the speakership, he thanked people, including Donald Trump. There are many Republicans who have their feet in both lanes, and there are clearly two lanes in the Republican Party, and that is an elephant in the room some people want to talk about, but it's a big elephant. And that is the pro or the MAGA Republicans, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, that really supported Donald Trump. And then you have the other, right? You have the, some would say, the more moderate, old school Republicans, Republicans that have wanted to move on from Donald Trump.
Leslie,
so when you hear the answer to that question, that's what you're hearing is oh, we're not talking about this, but we do think this is an injustice.
Let me
and
jump
I think
in.
that's
Let me
just an
jump in.
example of feet both ways.
Because this is really important. One thing that I think is outrageous, and we'll feel free to disagree, is for 3 Republican committee chairmen to send a letter to Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, and say, we want you to provide documents and testify in this investigation, no matter how misguided, politically inspired it may be. You can't ask any prosecutor to testify in an ongoing criminal investigation. Otherwise, the other side does the same thing. You've blown up the justice system, and you're in banana republic land.
Okay. Your point is not without merit, but you're criticizing the second shot fired. And I don't sit here today, principleless, and tell you, Howard, that therefore all bets are already off. But if you're suggesting to me, Howard, that we're descending into a banana republic because the federal government wants to inquire about an investigation on the local level, what I would say to you is, then it's also descending us into a banana republic if a local DA decides to politicize an investigation that is far beyond his purview. It's expired on the statute of limitations, and the felony has no New York tie. So he has used his office politically and to send us into a banana republic.
All right.
As to whether or not the federal government and Republicans should then look into it, I will say this. If there is a federal tie, meaning if there is federal money going to that prosecutor's office, they could say, well, we're not going to support a politicization of that office.
All right, let me get Leslie in. But first, I should say that Bragg put out a statement saying he has an obligation to protect the independence of state law enforcement against federal interference, and that it was Trump who created a false expectation that he'd be arrested. So not only does Donald Trump want Bragg fired, but Rand Paul, Leslie, says he should go to jail and didn't elaborate when asked by reporters. So does he even get a trial?
Well,
What's the
Hillary
charge?
Clinton was going to get her. I mean, look at all the Democrats that they wanted to lock up, but now that somebody may want to lock up one of theirs, oh, it's a whole different thing. It's not fair. The list goes on. It's hypocrisy at its finest. Here's the problem, and I agree with you 100%, Howie.
All right, I got half a minute.
This is beyond going into a banana republic. The problem here is if you want to be that family value, moral, Bible-believing party the Republicans claim to be, then what the Bible says is turn the other cheek. You can't say the second shot fired. You don't have to fire the second shot.
Yeah, but,
and in this case, the federal government
well, you
certainly
can say
should.
that, actually.
Yeah, but I'm really glad that everyone here is concerned about America descending into the banana republic. Can we at least indict the original sin and not the reaction to the sin? The original sin is in the Manhattan District Attorney's office.
Okay, well, we could go on for another 20 minutes, but I do have
Some would say it was in the payoff to Stormy
All right,
Daniels.
guys, gotta go. Thanks so much for joining us this Sunday.